Well, the first thing I really encourage parents to do is to learn how to listen. This is not a natural instinct, at least it wasn't for myself, to learn. And because naturally I did not listen to people. But it's extremely, extremely important to listen not just for facts, but also for feelings. And there's a difference between those two things. You listen on an emotional level and have some good interaction with them. And the second important thing is to learn how to affirm them. Affirm them not just for a performance, but also for who they are, their character development. My father loved me, but he never once, ever in his lifetime, ever said one good thing about me. I researched for 3 years. I read all the gay activist books that were published in those years, plus the classics, and looking for some ideas, or trying to get inside the thinking of the gay person, what was going on. And that's what I discovered, that it was a breakdown between the parents and the child. And there were some dynamics going on that were similar to other addictive behaviors. The father has to realize that his child may be different than him, different in temperament, particularly as we usually find a sensitive child and a domineering, either dad or mom. And those two personalities don't really get along. So the father's going to look at the child and say, that guy's different than me. And the child's going to look at him and say, this is not who I really am. So help the father to understand that he needs to appreciate his child, regardless of their temperament, regardless of their tastes, regardless of what they want to do. And I really, really encourage fathers to put forth an effort to get to know their child, to listen to them, to start affirming them, to appreciate their uniqueness. Spend time with the young person. Take the young person with you. I think this is the thing that most kids that I found have been just crying out for, because they want that affirmation, they want that attention, they want that acceptance from their father, or the same-sex person. And they don't feel like they get it. I use a term, an ounce of prevention. The child's perception trumps everything. It's not how the father feels, it's how the child feels, how they're perceiving the relationship. I've had, when I've had a father change, when they realized what they're doing, they got some help, I've seen kids walk away from the homosexual lifestyle. In fact, one young man had a partner for 7 years. He was 29 years old and just got up and walked away from him when the dad changed. So there's really a need. There's just that longing to have that connection with the same-sex person. And sex isn't the first attraction when it comes to homosexuality. It's affirmation, it's acceptance. Just plain, simply, do they like me? I think one of the things we're thinking about, one of the things that I think is a big factor is that the child perceives rejection. And rejection is extremely damaging. Now it's interesting, a little rejection is good for all of us. But when you feel that you're rejected as a person, you're not loved, you're not liked, you're just totally rejected, is very, very damaging and very, very hard to get over. What I like to say to parents, and I usually say this up front in the beginning, I said, you know, there's no guarantees in life. You can do everything right and everything can turn out wrong. This is true in business, this is true in the ministry, and this is true in family life. It's also the opposite is true. You can do everything wrong and it can turn out right. So number one, you have to quit beating yourself up for what happened or where they're at, but get some understanding as to where the differences are. Let's get some help in here. Let's give you some ideas of what you can do, how you can connect with your child. And even though they may have left home and be gone already, there's things that you can start doing to start reconnecting back. The way I mentioned to you my father was very, very hard. Never give any compliments ever to me. I became just like him. I started out doing the very same thing to my boys until God got my attention and I did an about face. And started learning how that I can listen to them, how I can connect to them. And our relationships just blossomed from that point on.
Your passion beats for Christ alone.
One of the stories I tell when I speak, and I'll share it with you because it's a very, very classic, and it was just depicts how that God gets involved in these things too. But when What's a Father to Do was published, I sent it out to all my mailing list. And on my mailing list was one of the fellas who was, I was his discipler when he was in high school. And he came under me, and he was a football player. And I'm giving you a description of who he was. A very husky, tough, rough and tough guy. He went into the Marine Corps. He was a jet fighter pilot. He flew in Vietnam. So now you get a little picture of what kind of a person he is. The day that he received my little booklet in the mail, the same day he received a letter from his son announcing his homosexuality. He called me, and he caught me at home. And as we talked, I knew who he was, because I'd been around him for years. But I did not know his son. And I was asking some questions about his son, and his son was a sensitive child. And I told him, in fact, his comment to me was, "Don, I've read your book. I've done everything your book has said. What has gone wrong?" That was his opening statement to me. So I told him, I said, "From your perspective, you've done everything right. From your son's perspective, being a sensitive child, you've done everything wrong. You cannot treat your son like you do your military recruits." And so I explained to him the difference. And so he took it very well, and I said, "There's three things I don't want you to do, you and your wife." I said, "I don't want you to damn him. I don't want you to put him down. In fact, anything you feel like doing, don't do it. It's wrong. The one thing I want you to do is I want you to be calm. And I'll send you my other book, An Ounce of Prevention, and give you some more insight, and I'll get back to you when I get back from my trip that I was about to leave on." So I called him a week later and I said, "How's it going?" He says, "Don, you won't believe what happened." He said, "I took your advice. I did exactly what you said." He was a good disciple of mine. And he said, and I apologized to my son for the way I've dealt with him. And my son says, "Dad, I really do not want to go into the gay lifestyle. All I want is a relationship with you." And the son turned around from that point on. And that's been about 5 years ago. And him and his son, because I still stay in contact with them, are continuing to grow, continuing to develop in their relationship. And homosexuality has never crossed this kid's mind again. All he wanted was acceptance. He wanted to feel accepted by his dad. And when the dad learned how to connect with his son on his level from who he was, the son walked away from homosexuality. We have some needs. Everybody has some needs. We have a need to be significant. We have a need to have our own identity. And we have a need to have our own dignity. And we like to feel honored. Well, these are needs that I have as a parent. These are needs that young people have when they grow up. And if we as a parent do not meet those needs or minister towards those needs, the young person is going to find it someplace. And they're going to be drawn into something that is not of our liking. I've said to mothers, and there's going to be more to it with a mother than just cuddling her son, is that you probably have criticized your husband an awful lot. And in fact, one mother, I had to use some very extreme words to communicate this, and told her to quit castrating her husband. And she was doing it, and wondering why, and then cuddling the son, pushing the father and the son apart. The father was embarrassed, yes. Now what he needed to do, he needed to stand up and be a man and take more responsibility and make a greater effort and which he did. And both of them, for a time, did make some great effort in trying to rectify that. But for a mother, it's not easy because they feel, particularly if it's an absent father or a father that's unavailable, they feel they have to take over, and they take over too long in that child's age. And so that child needs to attach to the father. He needs to be able to respect the father, and he needs to be able to see himself as a man, not necessarily like the father, but he needs to see himself as his own person and have his own identity and be proud of who he is. But a fellow that I've worked with had a very terrible relationship with the dad. And he even made an effort to connect with his dad when he was in his 50s. And the father wouldn't have nothing to do with him, just totally rejected him. And he had called me and told me this. Well, I called and talked to him a week later, and he was just the absolute opposite. He was bubbly. He says, "I'm the blessed one. Things are great, Don." And I says, "What really happened?" He's, I've come to the conclusion that God, or my father, my earthly father, is never going to ever give me a compliment. But my heavenly Father will. And someday when I stand in his presence, he's going to say, "Well done, thy good and faithful servant." And he says, "That is sufficient." I have to go with the assumption that a very small percentage of parents are going to change. I'm going to have to build the young person up to where their relationship to God and how they view God, that they can take that he's our real Father, and he's never going to let them down. He's going to be one who's going to meet all our needs. My wife can't even meet all my needs. My friends can't meet all my needs, but God, my Heavenly Father, can. So I've really got to focus in on reprogramming people as to who God is as our Father. Because most of us will gather our image of God from our earthly father, which will not be a very good one in most of these cases. But God as my Heavenly Father will never let me down.
Your passion that beats for Christ alone. Your passion.
Forgiveness is definitely a big issue, a big factor. And it's not that I excuse a person, I just give myself the liberty to walk away and not be trapped or not be sucked in on this. A lack of forgiveness can even cause mental health or health issues, not necessarily mental health, but health issues. But even going beyond that, one of the things that God had to really work in my life was to pray a blessing on people who've hurt me. I had someone who really did some very bad things to me. And I was so angry with him, I could have killed him if I had a chance. And I did all the steps of forgiving them and this type of thing, and yet no peace within myself. Just angry, terribly angry. One day in my quiet time, I was reading where Jesus said to love your enemies in Luke 6:37. And then he tells us how to love them, which I didn't like. He said, I want you to pray a blessing on them, of those who hurt you. And I said, my response was, God, you put it in your ear. There's no way I'm going to pray a blessing on this person. They just ripped me off, Well, a few more days and God's persistence, and I started doing that. Not that I wanted to. I just started doing out of obedience to the Lord, praying a blessing for that person's ministry. And something amazing happened. All of a sudden I had peace, total peace within. Nothing changed with that person. That person never repented, didn't do anything to compensate for what they had done to me. But I had inner peace. And from that day on, every time something goes amiss in my life, the Lord keeps reminding me, Don, you need to pray for this person. Pray a positive sense, pray a blessing on them. In a sort of returning good for evil. And it gave me a different attitude towards them, realizing that I could do the same things to them. And so I've really, that and along with giving, in all things give thanks. Not for the thing, but in it, in the process of where we're going through these hard times is to be a very thankful person. And that gives me a whole different demeanor. That gives me a whole different relationship with the Lord. And finally, it really puts me on a real special ground with Him.